Here.
Mhm.
Nice to see so many familiar faces. We are excited to be sharing this dialogue with you. And I'm just going to pull up of our slide deck here to get us going. And we will be sharing some handouts throughout the session as well. Centralization,
Flexibility,
equality,
unique,
introversion and extroversion,
activity and rest,
short term, long term,
the collective,
internal and external.
mm, planning and execution.
Oh, Susan, that one's never a challenge. Come on.
I know.
Here's one of my favorites, power and love. Wouldn't that be
Mm,
nice to see more of that in the workplace?
it would be. It would be. And mission and margin. That's also so important and something we see a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure many of you are familiar with these. And so we just wanted to start it off with, sharing some of the more common ones. And of
Hmm.
course, polarities, just for those of you who may be new to the concept, they're also known as paradoxes. Polarities are basically independent pairs of truths that need each other over time. They are energy systems that we live in. They live in us. We can't escape them. And it is an opportunity to really realize that we need the best of both. It isn't about either or thinking, it's about both and thinking. And we have values associated with each of these poles, each of these particular interdependent pairs that we're looking at. And if you want to look at it this way, if you want to think about just breathing, inhaling and exhaling, activity and rest, those are polarities, but we don't often associate values with it because it's something we just do naturally. But the notion of independent pairs is naturally more inclusive and less likely to generate questions early in the process that value pairs. So it's interesting to see how these work. Here are our objectives for the session. We'd love to hear from you in terms of whether or not these meet your needs. So we want to make sure that we give everyone a chance to learn more and to dialogue about polarities and to walk away with some polarity thinking tools so that you can use them in your practice with clients to help them, first of all, recognize and optimize those competing priorities. We're going to share with you, and we want to hear back from you. What are some
Hmm.
micro interventions that you're currently using to enable leaders to shift from either or thinking to both and solutions? And for no charge at all, we are going to, that's my humor, folks, okay? For no charge at all, we're going to create a polarity map and we're going to learn from some successful examples of how we've used polarity thinking to drive collaboration and performance and to support our clients. Okay, let's take a look at the poll here.
All right. So we have a poll. We want to just get in the groove and hear your voices. And Michelle will open that poll. If coaching is a dance, what best describes your usual style? Are you gracefully flowing with the client, taking the lead where needed, watching for when to pivot, wrestling with who is in charge, or still finding your rhythm? Just choose one. Doesn't have to be the one, just the one that's occurring to you now.
There's
Seeing
a QR
some,
code on the top right-hand corner of the screen if that makes it easier to access the poll, or you can join by web or text. The instructions are at the top of the screen.
yes. So if you can use that QR code, I'm seeing some responses come into the chat as well. So we'll pull this up. We'll give people just a moment to consider, where are you today? If coaching is a dance, what best describes your usual style? So we can see that the majority of our responses are the first three, 37% gracefully flowing. Then another, oh, there it goes, watching for when to pivot, taking the lead when needed, and then still finding your style. Interesting, nobody chose wrestling with who is in charge. And that certainly makes sense given our training as coaches and our coaching presence and mindset. What we wanted you to see here, and perhaps to experience as well, because polarities are really to be felt and sensed into. If coaching is a dance, no matter what your style, coaching involves movement between leading and following, spontaneity and structure. And so that dance is where the polarities live. It's not a right or wrong, but it's a dynamic rhythm. And what we try to do when we're navigating polarities is really become more skillful in how we are listening and directing, holding space, and driving action. I imagine that feels very familiar to all of you. Anything you want to add to that, Michelle, before we move
No,
on?
I think, it's, I love the metaphor that you've chosen, Susan. And I'm just going to take it off a stop share for a moment. We also are inviting questions as we go
Hmm.
along, and comments too. We want to make this like more of a conversation. And we do have
Hmm.
two breakout groups where we'll put you into dialogue groups as well. But I love this metaphor of dancing because, it really can be a dance, a very tricky dance. When you've got, say, like Susan and I do a lot of work with teams. And so the complexity becomes even more entrenched when you've got polarities and people are taking oppositional or differing views from one another. It's different than when you're coaching one on one and you can take a look and enable a leader to discover their own style. How are they dancing and how are they approaching metaphors? Um, but yeah, no, I think it's great, Susan. It's I think, you know what, why don't we move in and let's share what
Hmm.
we want to do in terms of moving forward, because how do we actually understand polarities? How do we first of all identify them? And that's what we call seeing. How do we map them? How do we encourage the stakeholders' voice to come in? And so how do we enable people to actually feel those polarities and understand what's happening and then make good decisions based on data that they're collecting from those stakeholders? And then how do we learn and leverage those particular polarities so that they can be functional? So I just want to share with you, because I think this is important. We often talk about, problems are solvable. Polarities aren't. Polarities are about managing this tension. So you need both, and they're both going to exist. So there's four conditions to be able to tell a problem from a polarity. And these are the four conditions for polarity to be present. If you continue to experience something over time, in other words, you're going back and forth, it seems to come around, that's a polarity. In what ways are these two interdependent alternatives? In other words, one can't exist without the other. If you ask this question, what is the necessity of having the upsides of both poles over time? That's having the both positives and being able to use that so that we can leverage that to enable our clients to be even more effective. And then, of course, we've got, to what extent will we be focusing on one upside to the neglect of the other, eventually undermining your productivity? And this is what we need to be aware of. If we don't successfully manage and have these challenging conversations around polarities and how we're going to work with them, we can absolutely go to the negative of one side. And I'm gonna share with you an example. In fact, we're gonna create a polarity map in just a few minutes. So Susan,
Hmm.
over to you, first of all, for our breakout group.
All right, thank you. And seeing some really great comments in the chat too, thinking about what kind of dance that we're talking about. Is it a tango? Dina, thank you for sharing John Larry Joyce's metaphor of the tango. And Joshua brought up, let's remember the both and. So we want you to go into your groups and have a conversation about how do you recognize when a polarity is present in a workplace situation faced by a coachee. We want you to discuss, what are some of the signs that you look for that tell you that you're working with the polarity rather than a problem to solve? And what clues are you noticing in the situation? What are you hearing in your coachee's language? And then what happens when these tensions aren't well managed? What are the outcomes or consequences? So we're going to ask you to go into your chat for about 12 minutes. And then be prepared to come back and just share what you're noticing, any broad learnings and ideas. And please appoint a note taker and a timekeeper just so we can keep everything on track and be able to do that share when we come back. All right, welcome back, everyone. So we want to give you a couple of minutes to share what you noticed. Share any patterns that you noticed in your conversations in the chat. Any signs that you look for, clues that you notice, perhaps in the coachee's language. Um, Maybe looking at the consequences of polarities when they're not managed well. What occurs after people are feeling those tensions in the room? So whoever your note taker was or anyone else, please feel free to share in the chat anything that you noticed in your conversations. We want to share the learnings here. And as Nicholas said, we're going to be able to share this chat with you. So this is a great way of crowdsourcing all of the wisdom and learning in the room. We'll just give you a moment. And Michelle's going to take some notes on what she's seeing in the slides. So we can see those slides now. All right, great. Seeing a lot of activity here. And Elizabeth, absolutely. So, Joshua earlier talked about the both and when we hear the yes, but, we hear that stuckness. You can only go in one direction. That negative language, Stefania, and Jamie, inconsistency between your words and your sensations, or even your actions, that stress that people are feeling. And Craig, I hear you talking about how sometimes they're hard to define. So it's a little bit vague. It's a sensation that something is not working. And as a coach, how do we help name that in the room? This or that, Gerdine, if I'm saying your name correctly, everyone, please feel free to correct me. I think getting names right is important. Having that fixed mindset.
And feel
And
free, folks, to come off mute if you'd like to add something to what Susan's capturing from the chat as well.
yes, thank you, Michelle. Entrenched. Again, it's that stuckness. Anybody want to go off mute and talk a little bit more about what are the clues that help you recognize that stuckness that a coachee is experiencing? Who wants to speak up?
Well, that's something that we talked about, Sona and Kathy and I, in that they get stuck in a binary thinking, either this or this, and are unable or unwilling or just have not yet explored other options. The way I just describe it is, many of us, think about, well, these are my circumstances. I can't change my circumstances. I can just brainstorm new ideas, new actions I can take to get different results from my circumstances. And I always say, there's another choice you have there, and that is see your circumstances from a new perspective, because that generates more choices than you had before. And so getting into that explorer mode from not either or brainstorming mode, but how am I seeing my circumstances first? And how many different stories can I tell about the facts of my circumstances? That's where the additional choices would come from.
You said something I think so powerful there, Mark. Thanks for sharing your conversation around being able to help someone see things from a new angle or different perspective. Elizabeth has her hand raised.
Yeah, what I sometimes hear in the yes, but is not so much entrenchedness, but a kind of two parts or two needs being expressed. Like, oh, this I want to do this, and then okay, it's an obstacle, it's a but it almost puts them. They're more in the middle than being in one of the extremes. So rather than being stuck on one side of the polarity, like I need there to be more rules or whatever, they're in the middle of trying, it seems, to respond to two opposing or polarized needs in themselves, right? A need for freedom, a need for framework, a need for exploration, a need for safety.
Yeah. So what I'm getting there, Elizabeth, is you know, that entrenched, it's almost like a narrowing of the field of vision. I only have one way I can go. I'm going to lose that freedom if I go for that structure. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
And vice versa. So they're kind of,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost, rather than being stuck or entrenched, I mean, yes, there is something, but it's almost stuck in the middle, like, well, I want
Mm-hmm.
this, but I also want that, but I want, and it creates almost a kind of ambivalence and a difficulty to move forward, not because there's on one side or the other, but because they're kind of pushed back and forth by both and are kind of
Yeah.
paralyzed in the middle.
Mm-hmm. So that ambivalence, that feeling paralyzed, I don't want to take a step forward because what if it's wrong? What if I choose a direction and it's not the right one? All right, Michelle, how are we doing on time? Anything else you want to add
I
in?
think we're good. Maybe just take one or two more responses or one or two more chats, and then we can move on.
All right. Yes, I think we're seeing a lot of things in the chat that are consistent with these themes of this sort of stuck in the middle, the ability to be able to take new perspectives. I'm seeing something kind of interesting. Heather, you talked about the notion of tetralema, to play with either or both neither. Do you want to say a little bit more about that, or anyone else who's familiar with that?
And Uma also raised her hand earlier too, Susan.
Oh, great. Thank you.
So I think Anne in our group would be much better because she introduced me and Daisy to the term. I got as far as Wikipediaing it. So if Anne's still on the call, she would be better to give a sense of tetralema.
So thank you for giving over the word. The tetralemma is kind of a tool that offers one alternative, then the negation, then both, and then none of those, and then a fifth element. And I suppose it derives from Indian lawmaking. I'm not sure about that. And I think in the German authors Insa von Sparrer and Vyas von Kibet, they used it quite oftenly in systemic thinking.
And thank you for sharing that, and Heather for calling that out. It's definitely something that we can look into a little bit more. So Michelle, was it Uma? And then Trish has her hand raised now, but I don't want to miss that earlier person.
And then we'll need to move on after that. That sounds great. Uma?
Thank you, Susan and Michelle. So I wrote it actually in the chat box. So as a facilitator, I've seen, I mean, all of this, I totally relate to what you've shared, and thank you. So there is no listening in the room. So people take positions and they just don't listen.
Yeah, that's a really good clue when people are taking a position my way or the highway, and they're just not open to that other perspective. Thank you, Uma. Trish, how about you?
Oh, that follows on perfectly from the nutshell statement that I typed in. Is what about cultural differences? And that came up from a member in our group discussion, is that somebody who she values very much has a very different perspective and not open to listening at all. And it's culturally inbred to be loyal and respectful, and meanwhile things are not moving forward.
That's really helpful, Trish. Thank you for what a great way for us to wrap up this part of the conversation and move on to polarity mapping.
Fantastic. How many of you have heard of the term polarity mapping before? Anyone been exposed to it? Raise your hands. Okay, so most of you haven't. this is a great tool, and it's a wonderful visual tool to help identify the desired results to achieve, the negative consequences to avoid. Basically, we can use it to help leaders, individuals, and teams recognize the polarities, balance those competing priorities that you were just talking about, and integrate a both and mindset so that they can make more effective decisions and they can collaborate better together. Just to give you a quick tip, I'm going to demonstrate this using it on a PowerPoint slide, but I've also actually taped this on the floor. And you'll see in a moment, we're going to be working with 4 quadrants, but you can actually put masking tape on the floor. And as you work through this, you can actually ask the participants to physically move between the quadrants. And it really gives them a great opportunity to feel more connected to the polarities and to be part of the being, doing, and thinking that we're exploring as coaches. Okay, so this is what we call a polarity map. I'm going to take it off a full slideshow, and we're going to try to do this so that we can encourage you to help us actually create a map together. As we're doing this, I just want to share a couple of things with you, first of all. The polarity map itself is, ideally, we have to agree on the names for the poles. So there's several steps here. So we're going to take, how many of you would agree change in stability is a polarized view that we experience in a lot of organizations, right? So we're going to use change and stability. We're actually going to identify up at the top a higher purpose statement. And this is what we call what will happen when we're actually doing these and balancing these poles really well. So let's talk about from an organizational perspective. We have ongoing or enduring success. You'll also see down at the very bottom that we do have another type of statement. This is what happens when we lose that greater purpose, when we don't manage the polarities well. And this is our deepest fear. And in this case, it's the fear of failure. If the organization doesn't continue to exist, maybe it becomes obsolete, even goes out of existence. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually brainstorm some of these entries. So Susan's going to help me identify. If you want to come off and voice your ideas, that is great as well. And you can also put your ideas into chat, because we're going to save all of this chat for you guys too. So I'm just going to take it off full screen mode here. So that way I am able to type this in here as we go along. Okay, so first of all, let's start taking a look. If we're looking at change. So let's say change is going really well in an organization. So we have a value around positive results. What might we see if we have change in an organization and it's going well? And I'll give you one example just to start it off, just to help kick us into this, to share what it would look like. Well, if change is going well, we might have innovation and growth. What other positive results would you see if change is going well?
All right, so competitive advantage, new growth opportunities, and Marilena, yes, you're going to get the slides. People who are embracing failure, feeling safe to be able to do that, celebrating that courage. I love that, Verena. You'll see employee satisfaction, agility. Yeah. Lots of ideas here, thriving. You might see improved retention.
Yeah, no, that's great. Lots of great ideas. I'm just going to wrap it up here with one, just so we have enough time. We're just going to give you some examples. Continuous improvement would be another one. Let's switch gears now and let's talk about the values behind stability, if we have stability in an organizational. So one thing that we might have is predictability and consistency. How many of you would agree that's important at times, right? We can't consistently operate in a fear of change, because then in a state of change, because then it becomes chaotic. What else does stability bring in terms of values? And again, feel free to share out loud or to contribute to chat, and we'll capture a few of the ideas.
Yeah, seeing improved speed and efficiency. and new job or role opportunities that people might be feeling some psychological safety and confidence.
Oh, I love that one.
Mm-hmm. Less insecurity.
Yeah.
Patricia, a strong, consistent culture narrative. So you've really got that collective, systemic view. Matthew, go ahead and come off mute.
It just kind of starts to dawn on me about the narrowing gap between therapy and coaching.
Mm.
And it's interesting because, you know, a lot of people look into the neuroscience part of it, and then they start to kind of veer over towards therapy. I don't know if you're in agreement with that, but it seems that, you know, to be a good coach, you do have to be able to understand the human psyche and what's behind it that you can't see.
It's an interesting comment, Matthew. For me, I actually have a psychology background, and I didn't choose to become a psychologist because I didn't want to be a therapist, or I didn't think I would be strong enough to deal with situations that were very emotional for people. So I do think there is boundary lines established between therapy and coaching. And I think that we have to be really clear on those boundary lines. However, I can honestly share with you as a coach, am I impacted by my clients? Do I feel what they're going through? Absolutely. In fact, that's why I have team coaching supervision and coaching supervision to help you monitor that. So yeah, absolutely. I'm just noticing our time here, so I'm just going to wrap up with one more here. Clear roles and responsibilities would be another sign that there's good stability and people know what they're doing. Let's do this. Let's go down to the downsides of when we have way too much change happening in an organization. So, for example, when there's a lot of change and it's happening too quickly, in fact, many of us might feel this in our own organizations, there might be chaos and confusion. Of course, none of us experienced that during COVID, and none of us are experiencing that right now, are we, with everything happening around the world and all the polarized views that are out there? What else might we experience from a lot of change happening?
Boy, a lot of quick comments here. So people really feel this one, I think. Feeling disengaged, high turnover, that lack of clarity that you mentioned, and inefficiencies that are happening as well. That anxiety that we can feel when we are not sure what direction that we're going in. And that can lead to underperformance, sense of overwhelm, even panic.
Wow,
as
I'm
Mark brings
thinking we
up.
struck a chord here with a lot of folks.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if these responses came really quickly, and if you were working with a team, that might indicate that they're feeling this much more so. And so when we actually get into the assessing point, you'll see why it's so important to check in with stakeholders' viewpoints. Okay, let's take a look at stability. What happens when an organization never changes, for example? It's too stable. What happens? Well, we might have rigidity and stagnation. What else might we have?
Boredom.
Boredom. Oh, you know what? Once in a while, I'd actually like to have that. Once in a blue moon.
Right. Complacency is another one. You might lose market relevance or add to the sense of bureaucracy and red tape, missed opportunities. And anybody who wants to go off mute and talk about anything that you're noticing here. We've also got a loss of talent. You're going to lose your innovative people, your creative people. Verena, you have something interesting here about the U model.
Yeah, I use it frequently. Someone before mentioned something about listening, deep listening, and I feel people are frequently quite, first you need to get all the facts off their chest. So there's first level of listening to facts. Second level of really listening, okay, how do I actually feel with all of this? And then the third level is where you really kind of like get to understand, okay, where is this really coming from? What's the underlying need? And once we've been going through all these kind of 3 levels, and there's really quite profound listening, then we get to a space where we can actually dive into emergence and see why we can take this now into the future and really create something from it. But I do feel it requires quite some profound levels of listening, and this is exactly what the unit model is doing. So I find that very helpful.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. The U model is really helpful. Absolutely. So if we're going to continue, this is kind of known as the core of the polarity map itself, but it's also very important to not just understand and to capture where things are, but to really be able to make decisions and to action out what we're noticing here and to look out for early warning signals or red flags. So let's start with some action steps first of all. So the action steps basically are what we're going to gain when we're kind of leveraging both poles. So for example, if we're focusing on the change aspect, we're probably going to consider some action steps such as these. Maybe we might want to actually pilot some new initiatives. Maybe we want to encourage a learning culture. And maybe we might have some periodic reviews of systems. So again, remember, we're trying to leverage both sides of the poles. Now, if we go over here, we look at stability and some of the action steps that we might use. Perhaps we might have a codification of best practices. I don't know how many organizations I've walked into, especially now with talent and membership changing amongst teams. They're struggling because they're not able to capture that institutional knowledge. Maybe there's some benefit to establishing governance practices. Anyone working with a high growth organization where that could benefit them. Maybe we might want to use benchmarks to guide change. So does that kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at when we're trying to, come up with some action steps to leverage both poles, but looking at through the lens of the one we're focusing on? Now, we also want to notice the red flags or the early warning signals that perhaps there's too much going on and it's unbalanced between the poles. And therefore, we might need to rebalance and take a look. So, for example, under the early warning signals under change, we might absolutely be noticing change fatigue. Perhaps people are having a loss of focus. I don't know about you, but some people, they always are constantly chasing that shiny object. Anyone want to take a look and maybe offer what an early warning signal would be like for the stability lens? What might we expect to see here? I often hear this complaint when I'm working with clients in the public sector. There is too much. What do people complain about in the public sector often?
Bureaucracy.
Yeah,
Yes.
you got it. Glad to see that it's universal and global.
Yes, there's lots of comments about that. I have to say, Michelle, I love the visual that you get with the polarity map. This is really helpful.
Yeah. Well, and the nice thing is you're not at this point, you're not asking people to take a polarized view on our own particular situation. We're just kind of capturing what would it look like. Yeah, missed opportunities might be another one. And sometimes we hear this, we have always done it this way before. I don't know anyone who's seen that one. So this is what we're experiencing. And so a completed map would absolutely look like this. So let me just put it on the full view so everyone can see this. So this is what we call the mapping aspect of it. And it's really just capturing what we need to do coming out of analyzing this. Those action steps basically are strategic actions that we want to implement. You might be looking at it, what are some things we need to start doing? but you might also be looking at potentially what are some things that we should stop doing. And the early warning signs, again, those are when we're out of balance. We're focusing too much on one of the polarities. And typically, you can't have the same early warning signs for your two polarities. You must be able to identify which pole you're in the downside of. So, for example, you might say there's low morale when there's too much change, or low morale when there's too much stability. But what you need to do is get to that point of clarifying low morale because. So get to those details. So what are those benefits of using a polarity map? It does take a little bit of time to invest. You can do this, as you can see, we just did this in under 15 minutes. Imagine if you had a little bit more time, but it does produce a framework for understanding these complex issues. It does decrease resistance. What happens is when people start to share their point of views, they're getting out of sharing those positioning statements that you talked about before. And they're now starting to share interests and the rationale behind their statements, and it reduces the change because we're starting to build common ground. Once the map's completed, we can now start to make better decisions, and it also improves collaboration because people have been dialoguing about these complex issues, and it gives them a common language and framework. And what I really love about this is it really enables us to have sustainable change through time. And that's what we're looking at for our clients. How do they continue to manage this ongoing tension through time? Before we go into the next breakout, I'm just going to pause for a second here and just see if there's any questions around creating a polarity map. And while we're doing that too, I'm also going to drop into the chat room a couple of handouts that will also be of value to you. So we're going to drop in, give me just a moment. We're going to drop in a sample polarity map so that you can also use this with your clients. And I'll drop in the PowerPoints as well. We do want you to ideally stay to the end, but just since I'm here, I'll make sure that we get all the handouts in, and I'll come back to them at the end. Susan, any questions, or does anyone want to come off mute and pose a question of clarification?
Yeah, I see Heather has a question around differences in creating a map as an individual, one-to-one coach versus in a team setting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you can actually, with your client, they're probably feeling the tensions of both sides, and they're struggling between manage that. So have them do what we call, it's a popular exercise. It's stepping into the other person's shoes. So imagine if they were on the extreme of feeling this way, what might they express? Imagine if they were a client or they were on the extreme of feeling the other way, what might they experience? So I think that's the best way to do it. It is a little trickier because it might take a little bit of encouragement to get them to see both sides, but it's in principle, it's the same as doing, here's the benefits for or against. It's a little bit of a force field analysis even, here's the two polarities and how might you experience those.
Mm-hmm. And then being able to have people, in a physical space walk from perspective to perspective or bring perspectives from different aspects of the team. We had someone who had their hand up and now you've gone off. Can you come back? There you are, Larry.
Thank you. Sorry, I may be jumping the gun here. So in the map, you mapped out the two polarities and the action steps for the two polarities. Are you then combining those two together to merge so it no longer it becomes yes and or both and or do they stay separate in that mode?
Yeah, so actually, we're going to talk about that when we get into the assessment stage, which is the fourth stage. Before we go there, if we could just park that for now, Larry, and you can bring the question back.
Absolutely.
Susan would like to do another breakout room And because there's other ways of addressing polarities other than using a polarity map. So we'd like to find out, what are some of those micro interventions that you might be using with your clients. And we want to give you an opportunity, and then we'll come back to the assessment the other stage, and absolutely.
I'm enormously grateful. Thank you.
Absolutely. So let's go into the breakout. We've got some other questions that are coming up that Michelle and I can look at while you're in your conversations. So again, thank you for putting all of this into the chat. So what we want to do, this again, is about crowdsourcing all of the wisdom and experience that is in this meeting. So we're all going to benefit. So we're going to give you about 15 minutes in your small groups to think about what we're calling micro interventions. Those are just small everyday actions that can help create a shift in energy, a shift in sensation, or a shift in the conversation that's happening. So we have some guiding questions for you to think about. What can you do or say when someone seems stuck in one side of a polarity? How might you introduce the other side without creating resistance? How can you invite curiosity or reflection instead of defensiveness or position taking? And then what small experiments or shifts have helped in your experience? We, again, want you to have a note taker, a timekeeper, make sure everybody in your group is able to, has a chance to share. And when you come back, if you can, offer a one-sentence micro-intervention. Offer up a real or imagined example of a helpful move where you have both the context and the intervention itself. Any questions before you go into your groups? Welcome back, everyone. We want to just spend a little bit of time being able to crowdsource your learning. Think about those micro interventions, those powerful shifts, phrases you might use, practices, postures you might take, ways of presencing as a coach that help unlock a polarity. So we invite you to share in the chat. We'll give you about a minute to write things in the chat. Anyone is welcome to go off mute and offer up something verbally. We have a little bit of limited time. So Michelle, what do you think? About 5 minutes here?
Yeah, and just to clarify an earlier question in the chat, can we riff around problems versus polarities? Problems are solvable. There is a solution. Polarities means you're always balancing between two of those poles. There's always a tension to manage. There's no one right solution. In fact, when we get into assessing, I think you'll see that more. I see we've got a hand up from Elizabeth.
Yes.
So back to you, Susan.
Great. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Hi, thank you. I find that a really powerful intervention is for getting to a polarity is saying it sounds as though you've set this up as an either or situation. And very often you don't have to go any further than that. But, you could also say, well, could both coexist? Is there truth in both? Who would defend that other situation? So bringing that, just making obvious the either or mindset is really powerful.
Just making that obvious. Thank you, Elizabeth. That's really helpful. And one I'm seeing in the chat here from Jörg, if I'm saying your name anywhere close, physically helping a client or coachee get up and move to another seat, face a different direction, argue the opposing point. And I think it goes to something we saw in the chat earlier as well, which was a question around, is this really helpful in one-to-one coaching? It seems somewhat heady. And we absolutely believe, that's why we did the poll. Polarities are experienced, they're sensations. They come up in the way we feel, into our emotions, into the way we engage in relationships. So just talking about polarities is often not enough, and being able to use that physical space. Michelle, do you want to add anything to that?
Add to that. Yeah, it's we both coach leaders, and we absolutely see a lot of polarities that leaders experience. And you can use metaphors. You can get them up and moving around to feel the physical sensations. Again, stepping into others' shoes. This can be really valuable because it then becomes normalized behavior that, oh, I don't have to solve this as a problem. It's not really a problem. I have to learn to adapt and assess the polarities and then work with those tensions. Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. We have so many great comments in the chat. Keep them coming because we're going to be able to share these later. Michelle, I know we probably need to move on at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to come into Larry's comment too. And this will fit very nicely with the next step, which is when we're looking at assessing the polarities. So we need to understand these polarities from multiple perspectives. So for example, if you're looking to define, how leaders are facing polarities across a division or an organization, you want to get those different perspectives right from senior leadership down to front line. So one of the nice things that you can do is obviously capturing data from both a qualitative and a quantitative perspective. In fact, I'm just going to take this off a stop share for a moment because I'm going to put into the chat just a handout on some questions that you might want to use in order to capture both qualitative and quantitative data. So give me just a moment here. I'm just looking this up, handouts, here we go. This is an assessment that you can absolutely use. So we'll share that with you as well. There you go.
Michelle, you are such a resourcer. I appreciate all of the handouts that you've provided here.
Well, you know what, Susan, you and I both believe in developing community, right? And that's so important. I believe there's lots of work for all of us to do. So if we can share our knowledge and resources, that's what it's about. So what are we looking for when we assess, the perspective of either the division or an organization, or maybe even a client? We're starting to try and look for patterns over time. So for example, is there over-reliance on one pole? Do they tend to relate to stability too often when they need to adapt more? Are there perceived imbalances? So do people feel like their perspective isn't being heard? Is it clashing, their personal values clashing, and is there an erosion of trust? We're also looking for opportunities and an appetite for change. So are people willing to explore this and to move further with it? And by doing this assessment stage, we really do ensure that the polarity thinking isn't just pie in the sky. It's grounded in the real experience. And this is starting to now give us those strategic leverage points that we can use, those actions that we were talking about, coming back to Larry's comment. You're not going to actually end up with just something in the middle. You're going to use some of those action steps, say from the change side at some point. And then when you find that you're hitting some of those early warning signals, then you're going to switch over to use some of the leverage steps more from the stability side. And when we use this assessment, it helps us identify any particular blind spots, and it also gives us an opportunity for common language.
What I love about, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Larry, I just want to check in to see if that answers your question that you had.
Yes, absolutely. It was the fact that we sort of in creating action steps, we polarized them, but it obviously maps out. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Awesome. Awesome. Susan, do you want to take the next two steps? Because these ones are often combined, and this is around the learning and the leveraging of polarity. So these are the final two steps.
Absolutely. So if you want to go ahead and share that slide. When you think about learning and leveraging, those are the final two steps, as Michelle just said. And we wanted to just give you a scenario to kind of walk through them. And here, let's imagine that we're working with the leadership team and they are struggling to implement a new workflow. Some of the leaders are pushing for tight processes and structure. They want timelines. And then others on the team are resisting. They're saying, hey, we need to be flexible. We don't know how things are going to go. We need space to adapt. So that you can hear is that polarity between structure and flexibility. So to help them think about what they're learning, you want to lean into that. What do you gain if we honor both sides? For example, you might be able to think about what you gain and what you risk. If you push too hard for structure, people can get burned out. I have worked with healthcare providers who are part of workflows, and they're just like, all I do is check a box. They lose their sense of why they got into the work in the first place. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but I imagine you have. And then on the other side, leaning too far into flexibility, it can be confusing. It can lead to dropping priorities, and often leaders are holding on because they need to mitigate that risk. So how do you help them gain from what they're learning to then identify multiple levers? So for example, here in this one, what if you have some guardrails that you put together where you're able to identify clear priorities that leave room for adaptation, or use tools like or strategies like feedback loops. So we'll get together every 6 weeks to review how it's going. Is the structure helping or hindering? Where do we need to adapt? So the big learning here, the key takeaway is that when both poles are honored, we are able to create a situation where people feel supported and empowered, and systems improve over time. Verena, like you're saying, that's where agility comes in, where leaders are modeling curiosity rather than framing resistance as defiance. So, resistance is simply an unmet need. Let's be curious about it.
And so Susan and I have had an opportunity to use polarity mapping in a number of ways. So anytime you've got a change effort underway in an organization, you're going to experience this opportunity to have these conversations. Mergers and acquisitions, when you're having significant restructuring, how are people responding to this? What are the polarities that people are experiencing? Because for some, it's an opportunity. For others, it's not. When you're having a service delivery transformation, or maybe you're introducing SAP, an enterprise-wide app for the organization, there's always going to be people on different sides experiencing, feeling, and reacting. And so it's a great opportunity to reduce all that resistance to change that Susan was talking about, open up the conversation and expand people's viewpoints, and now determine with good data, if you're doing the assessment component, so that now you can make decisions, and you can also recognize when we're going too far on one polarity and maybe we need to revisit. And I think that's the challenge we see, is we see organizations go from one extreme to the other too quickly, and because they're not basing it on these conversations and on the data that is happening. So absolutely. Susan, anything else you'd like to add before we get into our final reflection here?
No, just, I'm getting this sensation of balance, and balance is not ever a static place, but it's always a sense of being able to be dynamic and hold that space with that flexibility and adaptation.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah,
we're seeing some
absolutely.
things in the chat about one of the handouts, so we'll make sure to take care of that.
Absolutely. And I think leaders in particular, especially right now, they're experiencing so many polarities. We are living in this increasingly polarized world. Even just viewpoints of, should I look out for myself as a leader? Should I look out for my team versus other teams in the organization, protect my own team and staff. How do we manage, in the current climate of economics? Do we go short term versus long term? So there are so many polarities out there. And I think hopefully this session has enabled you to, first of all, become more aware of paradoxes that exist within that your clients have to manage, paradoxes that you may even be exhibiting as a coach yourself. You might be experiencing these. And so it's important to be self-aware of your own paradoxes that you encounter. And how do we surface these with clients?
Mm. And Verena is bringing something into the conversation as well around renegotiating your internal barometer of what change feels like. So it starts with self-leadership to lead with others. And one of the ways that I think about that is learning to reinterpret what change feels like, what that sensation of discomfort might be a signal of opportunity versus something to tamp down.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We'd like to ask you before you go, because we do have a couple more resources, so hang on, but we'd like to find out from you right now, and if you can kindly place into chat, what is one key learning or insight or even an action step that you might take away from this session and apply in your own coaching practice?
Yeah.
And so Susan, can I ask you just to key that question into the chat, just so that we can capture that, so that when people get the chat, they can refer to it?
Absolutely. Putting it in there now.
Great.
So we'll just give you a moment. Seeing a lot of comments around the mapping and the tetralema concept. Lots of resources that others shared here in the chat for folks. Yes, lots, again, the mapping, reviewing the handouts. What a great action step to take, Mark.
Lovely.
Yeah,
Oh,
seeing
I like this one
polarities
coming
as
in from Adira. Seeing
yes,
those
I know that's
polarities,
where I was.
emerging opportunities for resilience and alignment. Oh, you're speaking our language, Adira.
I know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Someone
Resilience is not a
polarity
place of
mapping and team
static.
coaching. Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Susan, I'll let you carry on with a few of the other comments here, and I'm just going to load in another resource as well. This is
Wonderful.
Barry Johnson, who actually created polarity in polarity management, and then it became polarity thinking. So I'm just going to put another resource in here while you're just looking at the last few comments as well.
Thank you. Yeah, Sagan, I love your excitement about you can't wait to use polarity mapping and team coaching. Orally recognizing and surfacing the presence of polarities with curiosity. Curiosity is such a powerful space to be in. Mariska, making poles more visible. And that's one of the things I love about the mapping. When we create a visual understanding, we're able to get all of us in a place where we're sharing enough detail to be able to come to a common ground. Trish, encouraging curious discussion, more about experimenting with the polarity map, and just simply acknowledging polarities so the conversation can start. What a beautiful way to, a simple tool to get started.
Yeah, we've had
And
some who've even explored polarities in the past. Now they're going to take some deeper insights back to them. And someone's also indicated that they've used it in team coaching, never thought of using it in one-on-one coaching. And now they're going to take it into that perspective as well.
that's great awareness.
I'm going to put up another couple of slides to share some additional resources with you. I also put a handout into chat on the top 10 things around polarities from Barry Johnson. But here's what we'd like to leave you with today. How will you bring this polarity awareness into your next coaching session. So something for you to think about. So this handout is also available in your chat right now. There are some additional resources that Susan and I have put together for you to reference. Couple of quotes here. Polarity thinking is the ability to see and leverage the wisdom in opposing truths. Wise leaders don't choose between competing values, they cultivate both. This, for me, Susan, really captures the essence of working with polarities.
That's beautiful.
Any additional questions that anyone might have? And then Susan and I have also put in our contact information. So if you want to reach out to either of us to follow up, please do so as well. But we're also happy to stay. We're both going to be able to stay for networking. And if there's any additional questions that you might have as well.
Yeah. And there are some questions about the resources. Michelle, can we share a new PDF of the slides that has the comments from today and make sure that those handouts go to Nicola? Nicola, is there anything you want to say about sharing things after the session?
Yeah, I have downloaded all your files as well, and I will put them on a Google Drive and send you all a link to them along with the recording when it's ready. So don't you worry if you haven't grabbed them, but if you can grab them, great, because you can have a look at those over your next cup of tea or your next cup of coffee, or depending on where in the world you are, your breakfast or indeed your evening meal. So
our colleague Judy's here as well from our STC. So not to worry, we are all about sharing and making sure you get resources. And Nicola, thank you so much for sharing those on a Google Drive too. We really appreciate that.
No, you're really super welcome. I'll make sure it goes out. And thank you both, Michelle and Susan. This has just been such a fun session. It's been really great. And it's been wonderful to really have something which is practical to take part in, see it in action, and then have a really cracking tool to be able to use afterwards. So thank you very much for your generosity and in openness and developing the profession here. It's greatly appreciated. I guess just one last question from me is, I mean, all the things that you've seen in the chat and the discussions that we've had here today, is there anything that's made you think differently, or anything that sticks in your mind yourselves about the topic here today, or what you might do next?
Michelle, you want to go first?
Oh, why don't you, Susan?
Okay. Well, you know what's striking me is how polarities are almost always present, and it's simply becoming aware enough to notice them. One that I've been playing around with for the last 90 minutes is that seeming polarity between sensation and thinking or cognition, and how what is possible when we are able to get to a space where we leverage both.
Yeah. Thank you, Susan. That's really lovely. And I'm going to build on that. And I think the key is, first of all, for us as coaches to recognize and be aware of when polarities are emerging in conversations, whether we're coaching a leader or whether we're coaching a team. And I think once we can identify that polarities exist, then we can bring in some of these tools that we talked about. And to be honest, I forgot about this practice for a couple of years. I'm a trained polarity and continuity transformation consultant. I'm so excited to bring this back into my coaching work. And if we can all just try to move this forward, I think we can actually de-escalate conflicts that exist in teams, or help leaders better manage the conflict associated with those tensions, and realize we don't have to solve for it. It's about how do we manage and become agile and adapt. And then now that we've got some tools to assess and then determine the actions that we need to, we know those red flags. Wow, we've really got an opportunity here to enable people to sit with and to be with, as you said, Susan, the tensions that are going to exist because they're two truths that are independent on one another.
Well, thank you both so much. It's been fun. And I've loved this last 90 minutes with you both. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Nicola,
Yes.
for inviting us back, and thank you so much for bringing us in. We love doing these conversations. Thank you to all the participants. My gosh, we couldn't keep up with the chat room at times. And we know it's lovely to have that engagement. And one of the things we love, and we saw that this was one of the things valued about this session too, is the comments, the dialogue in those breakout sessions. And that's why we love doing the dialogue series, because I think it's a great opportunity not only to network, but to actually digest some of the information you're taking in and explore it with fellow coaches. So thank you all so much for your participation here today too.